The council chamber fell silent when Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the massive doors. She was small compared to the alien delegates who filled the curved seats rising up around her. The Cathari stood nearly 3 meters tall with their hard shells and clicking mandibles. The Vorian had 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with their emotions. The Moltari floated in special tanks, their jellyfish-like bodies pulsing with light. Elena had studied all of them. She knew their histories, their customs, and their fears. But none of that knowledge made her feel less alone as she took her place at the small podium in the center of the chamber. The Galactic Council recognizes Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth, announced the Cathari speaker. You may address the assembly regarding the Zurath-Kandori conflict. Elena nodded and looked around the room. For 63 years, the Zurath and the Kandori had been killing each other. Their war had destroyed 17 colonies, 3 space stations, and countless ships. The Council had sent peacekeeping fleets 4 times. Each time, both sides had attacked the peacekeepers and continued their war. Now they wanted her to try. A human, a member of a species that had only been part of the galactic community for 32 years. Honored delegates, Elena began. I have read the reports from all 4 peacekeeping missions. I have studied the history of this conflict, and I believe I understand why all previous attempts at peace have failed. There were murmurs around the chamber. The Vorian ambassador's skin flickered orange with doubt. The Council has approached this conflict as a territorial dispute, Elena continued. It is not. It is a matter of honor, grief, and memory. Until we address those issues, no amount of military force will bring peace. The Cathari speaker clicked his mandibles. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council has employed the finest diplomatic minds in the galaxy. What makes you believe you can succeed where they have failed? Elena smiled softly. Because humans have been doing this to each other for 10,000 years. We have had more wars than any species in this room. We have killed each other over land, resources, ideas, and gods. And yet somehow we learned to stop. We learned to forgive. We learned to build peace from the ashes of hatred. The chamber was quiet. Elena could feel the weight of thousands of eyes on her. I do not come here with weapons or threats, she said. I come with something far more dangerous. I come with understanding. 3 days later, Elena stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Olive Branch as it dropped out of hyperspace near the Zurath border. The ship was unarmed and painted white. Captain Reyes stood beside her with his arms crossed. Ambassador, this is the craziest mission I've ever been on. Those Zurath ships have enough firepower to turn us into atoms. Elena watched the viewscreen as a dozen Zurath warships moved to intercept them. The Zurath were impressive creatures, 6-limbed beings with scales like polished metal. They won't fire, Elena said. How can you be sure? Because I asked them not to. I sent a message directly to Grand Admiral Zethkora. I told her I wanted to talk, just talk. I told her about my grandmother who survived the Third World War. I told her how my grandmother's village was destroyed and how she spent her life helping to rebuild it. Why would a Zurath admiral care about your grandmother? Elena turned to face him. Because Zethkora lost her home in the same way. The Kandari destroyed her birthworld in the first decade of the war. She has spent 60 years trying to make them pay, and somewhere in those years she forgot what she was fighting for. The communication console beeped. A harsh voice came through. Human vessel, Ambassador Vasquez will come aboard the flagship alone and unarmed. Reyes looked at Elena with concern. Ambassador, I can't let you go alone. Elena was already walking toward the shuttle bay. You don't have a choice, Captain. This is what I'm here to do. When Elena's shuttle landed in the Zurath hangar, she was met by armored soldiers who towered over her. But she walked past them without fear. Grand Admiral Zethkora waited in her command center. She was old, her scales faded and scarred, but her eyes were sharp. Ambassador Vasquez, Zethkora said, You are either very brave or very foolish to come here. Alina bowed slightly. I am neither, Grand Admiral. I am simply someone who does not want to see any more children grow up without homes. Zethkora was silent, then she gestured to a seat. Sit, tell me about this grandmother of yours. Alina sat, and she began to talk. She told Zethkora about her grandmother Maria, who had been 12 when the bombs fell. She talked about how Maria had hidden in a basement for 3 weeks while the world burned above her. She talked about how Maria had emerged to find everything she knew gone. And then she talked about what came after, how Maria had refused to give in to despair, how she had found other survivors and started rebuilding, how she had married a man from the other side of the war, a man whose country had been responsible for destroying her village. Your grandmother married her enemy, Zethkora asked. He wasn't her enemy. He was just another person who had lost everything. They chose to build something new instead of continuing to destroy. Zethkora turned away. The Kandori destroyed my world, my mother, my father, my children, all gone. How do you expect me to forgive that? I don't, but I'm asking you to consider something else. What would your children want for you? Would they want you to spend your life killing, or would they want you to find peace? You speak of things you cannot understand. Then help me understand. Tell me about them. For a long moment, Zethkora said nothing. Then she began to speak. She talked about her mother, a teacher. She talked about her children, twins who had been curious and brave. She talked about her home, a world of crystal mountains and silver seas. And Alina listened. She didn't interrupt, she simply listened. By the time the artificial sun set on the flagship, something had changed. Zethkora was not ready for peace, but she was willing to consider it. You are a strange creature, Ambassador, Zethkora said as Alina rose to leave. I do not know if your methods will work, but I am curious to see what happens next. Alina smiled. Curiosity is the first step. Part 2. The Kandori homeworld was nothing like Alina had expected. Where the Zurath valued strength and tradition, the Kandori had built a civilization of glass and light. Their cities floated above vast oceans, connected by bridges of pure energy. Alina had been on the planet for 2 days, waiting for an audience with the High Arbiter. Unlike the Zurath, the Kandori seemed determined to make her wait. She spent her time walking through the floating cities, talking to ordinary citizens. On the 3rd day, she met a young Kandori named Veltris in a public garden. That's the Zerath system, Alina said, recognizing the holographic display he was studying. The site of the Battle of 7 Moons. Veltris looked up at her. You know of it. 40 million Kandori and 35 million Zurath died there. Neither side gained any advantage. My father died there, Veltris said. His ship was destroyed in the opening minutes. Alina sat beside him. I'm sorry for your loss. Why, you didn't kill him? I'm sorry because you grew up without a father. I'm sorry because you've spent your whole life in the shadow of a war that started before you were born. Veltris was quiet. You're the human ambassador, the one who wants to end the war. Yes. My people think you're naive. They think you'll fail. They might be right, but I have to try, because if I don't, more people like you will grow up without fathers. The next day, Alina received a message. She had been granted an audience with High Arbiter Mothkai. The High Arbiter was ancient even by Kandori standards. His eyes had grown pale with age, but they still held sharp intelligence. Ambassador Vasquez, Mothkai said, I have watched the recordings of your meeting with Zethkora. You are skilled in manipulation. I would call it connection. I simply listened to her. Listening is a form of manipulation. What do you want, Ambassador? I want the war to end. I want your people and the Zurath to stop killing each other. And what do the humans gain from this? Alina smiled sadly. There it is, the question everyone asks. She walked to the window. Humans have watched you fight this war for 32 years. We've seen the destruction, and we've been reminded of our own history." She turned to face Mothkai. "For most of human history, we did exactly what you're doing. We killed each other over everything. And eventually, we learned that the only way forward was to stop." A pretty speech, but speeches do not end wars. "No, they don't. Actions do, which is why I'm here. I've already spoken to Zethkora. She's willing to consider peace." Mothkai was silent. "The Zurath destroyed 3 of our colonies. They killed millions of innocent civilians. How do you expect us to make peace with such beings?" "The same way the Zurath are expected to make peace with you after you destroyed their homeworld, by choosing to build a future instead of reliving the past." "You make it sound simple." "It's the hardest thing in the universe, but it is possible. I know it is because my species has done it." Mothkai studied her. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A meeting. Not a negotiation, just a meeting. You and Zethkora in a neutral location with no weapons, just 2 leaders talking." "The Grand Admiral would never agree." "She already has." Mothkai's eyes widened. "She agreed to meet with me." "She agreed to talk, to listen. I'm asking you to do the same." The old Kandori rose and walked to the window. "We have been at war for so long. I don't know how to do anything else." "Neither does Zethkora. That's what you have in common." Mothkai was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Very well, I will meet with Zethkora, but I make no promises about what will come of it." Alina felt relief wash over her. "That's all I ask, a meeting, a chance." As she left, Alina allowed herself a moment to feel what she had accomplished. She had convinced 2 of the most bitter enemies in the galaxy to sit down and talk. It was more than any fleet had achieved in 63 years. But the hardest part was still ahead. Getting them to the table was one thing. Helping them find common ground was another. She had to try because that's what humans did. They reached for peace even in the darkest times. They believed in change even when evidence said otherwise. Part 3. The meeting was held on a small moon in neutral space. The moon had no name and no strategic value. It was just a rock in the void. Alina had chosen it for its emptiness. She wanted both leaders to feel they were on truly neutral ground. The olive branch hung in orbit above the moon. Zethkora's flagship, the Eternal Vengeance, was on one side. Mothkai's vessel, the Infinite Progress, was on the other. Alina had spent 3 days preparing the meeting space in an old mining station. She had cleaned it herself and set up chairs and a table. Zethkora arrived first. She stepped into the room with the careful movement of a warrior entering unknown territory. "Grand Admiral," Alina said, "thank you for coming. I gave my word, but I still think this is foolish." A few minutes later, Mothkai entered. When he saw Zethkora, he stopped. For a long moment, the 2 ancient enemies simply stared at each other. Alina could feel the tension. These 2 beings had been trying to kill each other for over 6 decades. Millions had died because of their decisions. "Please have a seat," Alina said. "We have much to discuss." Neither moved at first. Then Mothkai walked to a chair and sat down. After a moment, Zethkora did the same. "Before we begin," Alina said, "I want to establish ground rules. This is not a negotiation. We are here to talk, to listen. Is that acceptable?" Both nodded. "Good. When did you last speak to someone from the other side, who wasn't a military officer or a diplomat?" Both were silent. "I have never spoken to a Zurath in any capacity other than war or diplomacy," Mothkai finally said. "The same is true for me regarding the Kandori," Zethkora added. Alina nodded. "You've been fighting for 63 years, but you don't know each other at all. You don't know what they dream about, what they fear, what they love." "Why would that matter?" Zethkora asked. Alina pulled a small device from her pocket. A holographic image appeared. A young Zurath child playing in a garden. "This is Kethra. She is 6 years old. She lives on a space station because her family was evacuated. Every night, she asks her parents when they can go home. The image changed to a Kandori family. This is the Meltris family. They have lost 3 sons to the war. Alina turned off the device. These are the people you're fighting for. They don't care about honor or revenge. They just want to live. Zethkora's voice was quieter. What is your point? You're both fighting for the same thing. You both want to protect your people. The only difference is you've been taught to see each other as obstacles instead of potential partners. Partners, Mothkai said. The Zureth and Kandori have nothing in common. You have your suffering in common, your losses, your grief. Those are powerful bonds. Zethkora turned to Mothkai. Your people destroyed my world. Do you know what that's like? Mothkai met her gaze. I know what it's like to receive news that 3 colonies have been wiped out. Then why did you continue fighting? Why didn't you? The question hung in the air. Neither had an answer because the answer was the same. They had continued because they didn't know how to stop. Alina let the silence stretch. The war continues because neither of you can afford to stop first. You're trapped in a cycle that neither of you started. She leaned forward. But what if you ended it together? What if you could tell your people, I didn't surrender, I made peace. I chose a future over a past we can never change. Mothkai spoke slowly. Even if we wanted peace, how would it work? Too much has been done. That's what my ancestors said after every war. And yet, somehow, they built peace from the ruins because they refused to accept it was impossible. She stood and walked to the door. I'm going to step outside and give you privacy. Take as long as you need. As she closed the door, Alina heard Zethkora's voice asking Mothkai about his family. And Mothkai's response, slow but honest. Alina leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Perhaps 2 old enemies, sitting in a room and talking like ordinary beings, could succeed where all the firepower had not. Part 4. The talking continued for 3 days. Alina provided food and water and otherwise stayed out of the way. On the first day, they talked about their families. Zethkora spoke of her lost children. Mothkai talked about watching his civilization become consumed by war. On the second day, they talked about their mistakes. Zethkora admitted that some attacks she had ordered had gone too far. Mothkai acknowledged that destroying the Zureth homeworld had been vengeance rather than necessity. On the third day, they talked about what they wanted. Zethkora confessed she was tired. Mothkai said he wanted to see his great-grandchildren grow up without fear. When they finally emerged, both leaders looked different. The hard edges of their hostility had softened. Ambassador Vasquez, Zethkora said, we have reached an agreement. Alina's heart skipped. What kind of agreement? A ceasefire, Mothkai said. Effective immediately. All combat operations will halt while we negotiate a formal peace treaty. Alina felt tears in her eyes. That's wonderful news. We have agreed to continue these talks, Zethkora said. In private, without fleets or the pressure of our governments watching. Just the 2 of us and you to guide the conversations. We recognize there is much work to be done, Mothkai added. Borders to draw, prisoners to return, but we will discuss them in good faith. Alina looked from one to the other. You've been at war for 63 years. How can you be sure this will work? Zethkora's scales shifted to a color Alina hadn't seen before, something soft. We can't be sure, but you were right. We are more alike than we realized. We both carry the weight of our people's expectations. We understand each other in ways no one else can. That doesn't make us friends, Mothkai said, but it makes us partners, or at least no longer enemies. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Zureth Kandori ceasefire was the biggest diplomatic development in decades. Alina became famous overnight. Humans everywhere celebrated her achievement, and other species looked at humanity with new respect. The Galactic Council convened a special session. Alina stood before them again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The skepticism was gone, replaced by wonder. Ambassador Vasquez, the Cathari speaker said, the Council is astounded. 4 of our best military fleets failed to bring peace, and yet you, a single human, succeeded. How did you do it? I didn't use weapons, Alina said. I used something more powerful. I listened. Listened? A Vorian delegate asked. Yes. The Zurath and Kandori forgot how to see each other as anything other than enemies. I reminded them that their opponents were people with hopes and fears and families. I gave them a space to talk. The Moltari delegate pulsed with curiosity. How did you know this would work? Because it's worked before, over and over throughout human history. We have ended wars through understanding, not victory. She looked around the chamber. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the smartest or most advanced, but we have something other species may have forgotten. We have practice at making peace. My species has been at war with itself for 10,000 years. We have committed terrible acts, but we have also learned to stop. We have learned that every enemy is someone's child. We have learned that hatred grows heavier with time, and the only way to be free of it is to let it go. Alina stepped forward. That is what I brought to the Zurath and Kandori. The wisdom of a species that has learned again and again that peace is possible. The chamber was silent. The war is not over, she continued. The ceasefire is just the beginning, but the most important step has been taken. Zethkora and Mothkai have started to build something new. The Cathari speaker clicked his mandibles in respect. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council owes you a great debt. The Council owes me nothing. I only did what any human would do. I tried to make things better. That's what we do. Part 5. As Alina left the council chamber, Captain Reyes was waiting. He was smiling. You did it, he said. You actually did it. Alina shook her head. They did it, Zethkora and Mothkai. I just opened the door. Still, the galaxy will remember this. Alina looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, families were receiving news that their loved ones might come home. Children were learning they might grow up without fear. I hope they remember why it worked, she said. Not because I was special, but because I was willing to try something different. Because I believed that enemies can become something else. She turned to Reyes. That's what I want humans to be known for. Our ability to see possibilities where others see problems. Our willingness to reach out when everything tells us to pull back. The negotiations between the Zurath and Kandori continued for 6 months. Alina was there for all of it, guiding discussions, smoothing conflicts. It was hard, frustrating work, and there were moments when she thought everything would fall apart. But it didn't. Little by little, the two peoples built a framework for lasting peace. Borders were drawn, prisoners were exchanged, trade agreements were signed, programs were established to help citizens learn about each other. The peace treaty was signed on the first anniversary of the ceasefire. Zethkora and Mothkai stood together as they placed their marks on the document. Alina watched from the sidelines, tears streaming down her face. She had done what everyone said was impossible. But as she watched the two former enemies shake hands, she knew the real heroes were them. They had found the courage to change. They had found the strength to let go. She had just shown them the way. The galaxy was vast and full of conflicts. There were other wars, other hatreds waiting to be resolved. Alina knew she couldn't fix them all. But she could try, one conversation at a time, one connection at a time, one step toward understanding at a time. That was the human way. As the celebration continued, Alina allowed herself a moment of pride. Her grandmother Maria would have been proud. In the ashes of the Third World War, Maria had made a choice. She had chosen to build instead of destroy. Alina had carried that lesson across the stars. And now, because of one old woman's courage and one young ambassador's faith, two peoples who had been killing each other for 63 years were finally at peace. It was, Alina thought, the most human thing in the universe. And she was proud to be human. Years later, when historians wrote about the end of the Zurath-Kandori War, they would call it the Peace of Understanding. They would study how a single human, armed with nothing but empathy, had accomplished what the greatest fleets in the galaxy could not. But Alina never saw herself as a hero. She was just someone who had listened when others had shouted, someone who had asked questions when others had made demands, someone who believed that even the oldest hatred could be healed. That belief, she knew, was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their military strength, but their stubborn, irrational faith that tomorrow could be better than today. The galaxy was vast and ancient. It had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. It had witnessed wars that lasted centuries and grudges that spanned millennia. But it had never seen anything quite like humans. They were small and short-lived. Their technology was modest. Their place in the cosmic order was uncertain. Yet they carried within them something precious, the knowledge that peace was always possible, that enemies could become friends, that the future was not written in stone. And now, thanks to one ambassador and one impossible peace, the galaxy was beginning to learn that lesson too. Alina Vasquez retired from diplomatic service at the age of 65. She spent her remaining years on Earth, in a small house not far from the village where her grandmother Maria had grown up. The village had been rebuilt 3 times since the Third World War. Each time, it had risen from the ashes a little stronger. Alina liked to sit on her porch and watch the sunset. Sometimes, young diplomats would come to visit her, seeking advice about their own impossible missions. She always told them the same thing: listen, really listen. Everyone has a story, everyone has pain. If you can understand that, you can understand anything. And then she would smile and add, and never give up. Humans don't give up. It's our best and worst quality. The Zurath and Kandori kept their peace. There were difficulties and setbacks, as there always are, but the foundation Alina had built held strong. Every year on the anniversary of the treaty, Zethkora and Mothkai would send Alina a message. The words were different each time, but the meaning was always the same. Thank you for showing us another way. Alina would read their messages and think about her grandmother Maria, about all the humans throughout history who had chosen peace over war, understanding over hatred, hope over despair. She was proud to have carried on their legacy. And somewhere out in the stars, among species who had once dismissed humans as primitive newcomers, a new saying began to spread. When nothing else works, call a human. They have a way of making the impossible happen. It was, Alina thought, the best compliment her species had ever received. And it was well deserved.